Hey everyone, it's BrowncoatNerd. Today I've got something a little bit different for you. This won't be a review, but rather I'm going to show you how to replace one of these trigger safety triggers on the M57 Tokarev if you've purchased one of those. These have been coming out, at least two batches I've seen on Classic Firearms, and the cool thing about these, just kind of a quick history, if you don't know, for importation of a handgun, it has to have a manual safety added onto it. So basically what happens is most Tokarevs will come in with one of these really ugly added on safeties that was not done by the manufacturer. It's not how they would have been originally issued. It just kind of mucks the gun up. And the original safety that was on these guns was a half cock feature. Of course, everything is unloaded. But basically, you just pull the hammer back a little bit, lock in place, and that's your safety. It locks up the trigger and the slide. But because of that law, you get these safeties added on. It drills into the slide lock there and this little retainer tab for the slide lock, and not to mention the two holes through the actual frame of the gun. It's just horrible and it's ugly. But luckily, some of these have been coming in. So far, I've only seen the Yugoslavian M57s come in with this trigger safety, and basically that counts as your manual safety. So you import this, you don't have an ugly added on safety up here or back here. And once it's imported, you can do whatever you want with it. So you can put the original trigger back on these guns. So you can get a pretty authentic, unmolested Tokarev this way, which I think is pretty awesome. And I would really love them to see them import more Tokarev models with this style of safety. I mean, we've got a lot of Romanian Tokarevs coming in. I really wish they would do that with those, and well, I'd probably be tempted to buy one. So first things first, you need to get yourself a replacement trigger. Now, one thing to note about this is the Yugoslavian Tokarevs have a magazine disconnect safety. So basically, if the magazine is not in there, the gun's not going to fire, even if it's, the safety's off or the half cock is off. And as far as I know, the Yugoslavian Tokarevs are the only ones that are like that. I've got another kind of quote-unquote standard Tokarev out here to kind of show some examples. That will be a Polish one. This one does not. The Russian ones don't. The Romanian ones don't. So that gives us a little bit of a unique issue. Now, if you don't like magazine disconnect safeties, and I don't blame you because I personally don't either, you do have the option of quote-unquote removing it. The problem with this gun is once you remove it, basically you're breaking it off the gun. So I'll show you real quick. Now, if you have one of these, I'm going to assume you know how to disassemble your gun and remove the panels there. So I'm not going to get into that. Basically, all you need to do is just remove your grip panels. So right away, you can see this bar here is your magazine disconnect safety. And so basically what you do is you just jam like a screwdriver in there, you bend it back and you break it off. You can see, I mean, that's in there permanently. There's no, really getting that out. So I don't like these, but I don't want to do something to the gun that's not going to be reversible. So my Spanish Star BM that had a magazine disconnect, those literally just like fall right out of the gun. So I had no problem removing that. Because I prefer them without it, but I still have it on hand. I can put it back in for historical value, and I mean, I have no clue why I'd actually go out and put it back in, but I don't want to do something to it that kind of takes away from the original uniqueness of the gun. Now, I understand a lot of people aren't like me, and they're just going to be like, I have no problem whatsoever breaking that tab off, and that's fine. And if you are one of those people, that makes this job a little bit easier. But if you're like me and you're really a stickler for the details, I kind of wanted to retain that magazine disconnect on this Yugoslavian gun. And also, it was the only, Tokarev, or at least that I know of, that they put out with these mag disconnect safeties. So it's kind of part of the history and uniqueness of the Zastava Tokarevs. So how this works, basically, is your standard trigger is solid. Kind of like the other side of this trigger. I've already done some work to this. So it's just solid across. The Zastava ones have a little notch cut into it, and that bar will sit down in there. So, you know, cock it so the safety is not on. But when I pull the trigger, you can see the edge of this notch here it's catching on this bar, this little, I'll call it a safety bar. I have no clue what the proper terminology, but for now, that's the safety bar, and it's hitting this trigger bar. So, once you put a magazine in, that magazine pushes up. You can actually kind of see that spring go up there, and it pushes that up. And it pushes it up just enough out of the way. And this has been safety checked. I don't know if I did this one or not. In front of you guys, I did this one. I don't know if I did this one on camera, just to clarify. So now it hammers back, magazine is in there. The way that bar is cut, see how it kind of sticks out? The trigger bar can now slide underneath our safety bar. And click. These triggers, in my review of this gun, I talked about how these trigger pulls was rather inconsistent, and sometimes you had to really crank down on it. Well, that was one of those times right there. So that's how this works. Now, one option you have is to just take a regular safety off of any, standard Tokarev and pop it in there. This one was advertised as a Romanian, a Polish trigger. And as you can see, I cut the notch in there. So when I first got this, I just, out of curiosity, I popped it up in here, and surprisingly, all it did was just push our safety bar up, the solid trigger bar of this Polish trigger, pushed our safety bar up, and it almost disabled the safety right then and there. I don't know if that pushing down on the trigger bar might give you a little more resistance on the trigger pull, if it might make it feel a little more grimy. I just did it a few times and it felt normal. I wasn't, paying a whole bunch of attention because I knew I was going to do this. So you do have that option. And even though it was sticking up, when there's a magazine in here, that safety bar is going to stick up a certain amount. So I don't feel like that would interfere with putting the grips back on. So I'm pretty sure you could just take a normal trigger, slap it up in there, at least on this model, it worked just fine. And you'll, render that obsolete. And you've got a functioning trigger without that little trigger safety. But me being me and a stickler, and I couldn't find any Yugoslavian triggers. They had kind of dried up along with the holsters. And I will say that is true at the time of me making this video. A lot of times I'll have people comment, months later, and they're like, oh, well, there's 3 sites that have them. It's like, well, yeah, now. But anyways, so I couldn't find any Yugoslavian triggers. I wanted to hurry up and just put a standard trigger in here. And even the normal triggers, it kind of dried up. I had to look around quite a bit to find this Polish one. But to retain the trigger safety mechanism, all they did was just cut a notch. Rather crudely, this is only my 3rd time using a Dremel, so be easy on me. And I bought the Dremel to remove the thread protector of my Vepr. I used it a 2nd time to remove the thread protector on my M92, and this was the 3rd time. So I just kind of cut a little notch in there, threw it in there, and it wasn't quite working, and then I realized what I needed was more of a straight angle on that front so that the safety bar would actually catch it rather than just kind of curve around it and hop over it. So before I had this straight, and as you can see, that's not very straight. Originally, basically, both ends looked like this side on the right there. It was just kind of a scoop out of the trigger bar. And sometimes the magazine disconnect safety bar would intercept with that and hold it if the magazine wasn't in there. Sometimes it wouldn't, and you'd still be able to pull the trigger. So it was inconsistent that way, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to function like the original Zastava trigger. So all I did was just make that a little bit flatter, and as you can see, it's not even really straight, but that's really did the trick, and it holds up in there very well. And all you got to do to replace these, change out these triggers, remove your grip panels. Got a little leaf spring back here. Just push down on that. Back out the bottom of the trigger like so. Take your new trigger. Sometimes you gotta wrestle with it a little bit. And then voila. Now I will say, before I cut this notch in there, when that was a solid trigger bar, I had popped it in and it was kind of like down like that. It hit that little foot there of the safety bar, and it actually, I was able to dry fire it like 2 or 3 times, and then I realized it wasn't up in there all the way, and so I just kind of pushed it, and then it popped and pushed that safety bar out of the way. So when you're doing this, make sure that's pushed up in there and seated properly. But now with that notch in there, you can see that safety bar is doing its job. It's intercepting the trigger bar and not allowing it to fire. And you insert a magazine, it's pushed up. Presto changeo. You've got an authentic-ish Zastava trigger. Now, since I had purchased this, Classic Firearms was smart and realized what people were doing with these. And that's really the big appeal to getting this specific import setup, is to change out that trigger. And so they actually got a batch of Zastava M57 triggers with that notch cut in there. And at first I was like, well, I don't need to worry about that. I've got this Polish trigger and it does the job. It feels really nice. I've had no issues with it. And then I started thinking, and I'm like, this is so close to being, you know, a very original Zastava. So I went ahead and ordered one. It's in the mail, hasn't showed up yet. So just to let you guys know, you've got a couple of options when it comes to, you know, returning this gun to its original setup. So yeah, I just want to let you know, there's a few videos out there on this, but you know, I just want to make sure you guys see this. It's a super easy job. Like I said, I've only used a Dremel twice, you know, I mean, it doesn't have to be pretty. Luckily, once you put the grips on, it's all covered up. Where'd my grip go? So it looks just as good. And like I said, if you're super uptight like me, just be patient, wait for his, you know, someplace to get his Zastava trigger in stock. And then you can get one of those, or you'll end up with an extra trigger, which I guess we'll have 2. I don't know about this thing. And also, yeah, this is worth mentioning. One thing that worried me just a little when I first got this trigger was the back of it was shaped just a little different. It has like a little notch. See, it's got a little notch, and it kind of comes to a summit there on the right side. Whereas this one, it still has that notch, but the summit on that more centered. And of course, this isn't really a Zastava trigger that's been milled out and that thing put in, or at least I don't think. So I'm not sure why there is a difference. Like I said, this was advertised as a Polish trigger, so you know, there's expected to be a few small differences, but it has not impeded in the performance or function of this whatsoever. So just so you know, if you order a trigger and you notice that and you're like, oh crap, don't sweat it, you're good. All right guys, that's all I've got for you today on this. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Stay shiny.